Mental illness doesn't just affect the individual, it affects their families and loved ones as well. And if you're a family member of someone with a mental illness, you already know that. Learn how to cope with a loved one's mental illness and move beyond your hidden suffering. Next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. If someone in your family is living with a mental illness, you've experienced your own kind of suffering, a suffering that likely has been hidden. For all those times you've spent supporting and worrying about your family member, and for all those times you thought no one understood what you were going through, tonight's program is for you, to give you some ideas about what might be helpful for you and to let you know you're not alone so that you get to feel a sense of hope. Be a part of tonight's conversation by calling the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. We'll be answering your questions throughout tonight's show. My guests are Joanne Fairfield, a psychotherapist with the Human Development Center who works with adolescents, adults, and families, and Jan Tomeno, who is the president of the Duluth area chapter of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and she's the mother of an adult son who lives with bipolar disorder. Thanks to both of you for being here on our first winter night of the season with snow and a little snow that might be sticking around just in time for the City of the North Parade. So, Jan, I think we'd like to start with you to tell us a little bit about your journey with your son, and starting with how you discovered that your son had a mental illness.
So I first discovered, I really didn't have an inkling of it. I was called by his high school counselor. It was within the last 2 weeks of his high school year, he was a senior, that he was bringing him to Miller Dwan, and that he was really struggling. And he had been having some episodes of struggling, had just, I can't even put my finger on it, and it was 15 years ago now. But so I met them at Miller Dwan, and he was diagnosed with bipolar then. I was familiar with bipolar because I also have a sister who lives with bipolar. And so I felt like, oh no, it was a shock, actually.
A shock to your system, and not something that you were expecting.
Not at all, not at all.
Then, and Joanne, in terms of when you're working with families, is this often the story that you hear?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think not only is the initial shock, but often diagnosis is something that takes a fair amount of time. So families are adjusting to something's wrong, but don't necessarily know right away what is wrong. And that in itself can be very painful and really hard to wrap your head around. And if it's an adult, it becomes even more difficult because getting information about a patient who is an adult patient who's a family member can be problematic because of legislation like HIPAA, and sometimes because the patient themselves does not want the rest of their family involved yet. So it gets difficult, period. It's, I think there's a period of grieving that kind of goes with it too.
You mentioned that that for some families, one of their struggles is that they don't know what the diagnosis is for quite a while. You did not have that part.
No.
To go through, and
Right.
It sounds like you knew a little bit about what bipolar disorder already was, and so there was the instant diagnosis with also a bit of the reality of what that meant then for you.
And then I also questioned, was there a diagnosis such as bipolar just because there was already a family member, and so was it correct? So I kind of struggled, but yes, indeed, it really was and is bipolar.
But I think I like the fact that you said that there was a struggle for you about the reality of the diagnosis, because not only did you have the prior experience of the other family members, so knowing what that meant, but so that carries a whole bunch of weight all by itself. So it makes you want to not believe that it is. And then you're also afraid that, what if they're just saying that? What if it's something else? What if they're making a mistake? And there's a lot of what ifing.
I went through all that.
Yeah.
And it's like a roller coaster. And you go through a grieving process, and it's not a grieving process that ends, it's an ongoing grieving process.
Yeah.
So I hit all different stages, and depends at what stage of life I'm in or what the situation is at hand on what process I'm in.
Tell us a little bit about what the early grieving for you was.
It was bargaining, it was sadness, it was anger. I hit them all pretty much simultaneously. Not so much the anger then as more of the sadness, I think.
And I've noticed that a lot of folks also struggle with that sense of responsibility. They go through that, whether you call it bargaining or blaming, of like, what did I do? How did I make this happen? Is it something I did? Is it
Parents particularly?
Oh, for parents, very much so. And then I think for a sibling, it's hard because a lot of what's the word I want? Organizing of the family gets
Right.
organized around the person who has the illness,
Right.
and that can shift the family dynamics around quite significantly and make it really hard for siblings to have an understanding. And how do they respond in a way that is fair but also still leaves space for them?
That's so true. And this son is the youngest of my 4 children. So I didn't have other children living at home at the time, but it doesn't matter because there is still so much attention that goes to somebody with an illness. And, you know, it could be mental illness, could be anything, but in this case it was mental illness. And there was a lot of attention that was totally spent towards him. And my other kids and I, we've had a lot of conversations about that since. But it's something I recognize and something that I've worked on over the years as well.
I think that's such a wonderful example, though, about how your children are always your children, no matter how old they are. And
Absolutely.
so you can have adult children who can function very independently.
Right.
And when something like this happens in a family, whether it's a physical illness or a mental illness, you know, I still want my mom time.
Right.
I have my ideas about who I want my mother to be in my life, and I want things to be the same with that. And I want that to go according to what my plans are. And so it sounds like that was sort of an adjustment for all of your family, then, not just...
It was a big adjustment.
Since you have the story of being both a sister and a mother to somebody with a mental illness, tell us a little bit about from just the sibling perspective.
And I'm also a daughter. So my mom had chronic depression from the time she was in her 50s on. So from a sibling perspective to being a mother perspective, very different. Being the mother is much, it's so grave. It's just, I'm so embedded in it. And my sister lived out of state, where my son was very close, and it was really our immediate family that was affected by it. So there were a lot of situations and things that happened within my sister's life, but it didn't affect me near as much. But I became very familiar with the illness.
And I think that familiarity, as you said earlier, can be a benefit.
Yeah.
But it can also be a cost.
Yep.
Because you can go, but what if it goes this way? What if it goes that way? And bipolar disorder is not necessarily an easy diagnosis to make. And in a lot of the serious mental illnesses aren't easy diagnoses to make, which is why it can take a while. And I loved what you said earlier about that the grieving process wasn't just at the beginning and then done.
Right.
But rather that it's something that you've been working on periodically. It comes back.
Yes.
It's almost like every time you go through another change, or your son goes through another change,
Yes.
you're going through it again. And I'm not sure that there's a shortcut through that. I think, and I'd love you to speak to how much it helps, though, to be well educated about what the illness is.
I think that is key, and so I'm a nurse, but that did not prepare me for this whatsoever. So everything I've learned about bipolar and other mental illnesses are things that I've read and I've really searched out. I've looked at the illness, and that's what I recommend for people to do, is really look at what it is and really understand it, understand the medication, understand side effects, understand treatments. We're not always included in treatment plans as family members, and it's really difficult. But if you at least understand it, it really does help.
I think you said something that's really important too, is that your role as a nurse did not in and of itself prepare you
Right.
to be the mother of a son with bipolar disorder. And I think that there's a lot of notion that, oh, well, if you're in the health field, then you must know how this works and that this is going to be easier for you then.
Maybe it's more difficult. I don't know. I never have worked in the mental health side of things, and I think with any area of healthcare that we're in, unless it's our specialty area, we really don't know. We have an idea of what goes into it, what makes up a diagnosis, but we really aren't adept at really dealing with it whatsoever. I have many friends who are nurses that have no idea about the different mental illnesses, none.
Let's talk a little bit about you referenced HIPAA, which is the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act, all of which is a big way of saying that in receiving any kind of health care, you are entitled to privacy. And what this means when you're an adult with a mental illness, you get to say who gets to be in a session with you, who gets to know about your treatment. And so if a person doesn't want their parents involved in their treatment, they can exclude them from their treatment. And then healthcare providers have to abide by their wishes. That is the standard of the law. So talk a little bit about, there are times when I think, there are times when I feel as a provider, as a mental health provider, that law interferes with my ability to provide the best care to the whole family system. And I am frustrated by that, and I am trying to, and then I have adult parents who are maybe calling me, and while they can give me information, I can't speak specifically to their child, and I feel the frustration for the parent as well. Talk a little bit about your perspective with that.
It is so difficult. I think it is the most difficult thing. And I've been fortunate at times where my son has signed consent and given them, I've been able to have conversations, I've been included in some things, and then other times when I haven't been. So it depends on the nature of the illness and how things are going. And I have also called provider's office. I've mailed, I've emailed, and I've called just to give my perspective, knowing that they can't call me back. And I say that up front. And I always encourage people to do that. At least you're passing on information. How else are they going to give it? In any other medical diagnosis, to me it's kind of crazy. I understand HIPAA, I'm embedded in it, but yet families are included. But this is the nature of the beast here. So.
Now I always encourage family. I do encourage family members all of the time that you can always leave me information. I personally find that to be tremendously helpful, and I will share with my clients, hey, your mother called, this is what the concerns are that she had. Tell me how you handle that.
That's exactly what I do. As much as I can, I encourage people, because I sometimes work with family members like yourself who, and they're my client, not the mentally ill person. And I will openly encourage them to provide whatever information they have to their family member's provider. Because as a provider myself, I need that information. It's gold for me. I will also let my client know that I've got that information and they get a chance to respond to it. And I try and encourage my clients to sign the consents on the basis of that the more well-educated their support is, the better the support they're going to get. But it does depend on at what point in the illness, whatever the illness is, that client is at, is whether they're open to that or not.
Right.
And we do know that in some, particularly some very serious mental illnesses, mistrust and suspicion to the point of paranoia can be a part of that, and that's a part of the illness. And so sometimes kind of working around that symptom can be really challenging.
And I understand that. It doesn't make it easy whatsoever.
No.
And even when there have been consents signed, there's time limits on those. So they have to be re-signed, or they've also been rescinded.
Absolutely. And I think the other part about having those consents is I actually like to get people in the room. If I have an open consent, I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce the patient or the client to having a family member in for some of the sessions, because sometimes the fear of what that will be like is greater than the reality of what actually happens. So when there's a consent in place, I'll make some real efforts to say, how about we get one of your family members in?
And sometimes I think that we have the opportunity then to even help both the family member and the person with the mental illness start to begin to communicate with each other more openly, not just about the illness, but so that communication isn't only about mental illness, right? That we get back to
I am not my mental illness.
That we get back to being a mother and son.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is so important. So again, it depends on what stage an illness is in, though.
Here's a question. A woman calls in, Joanne, and says that she has depression and also has a family member with depression. How does she cope with both of those things at the same time?
Well, if I were her therapist, the place I would start is like she needs to start with herself first. Because if the priority goes to the other family member first, it's kind of like two people drowning at the same time. So to take good personal care is really important. And I think that's true whether your family member is the person who's ill or whether you're the person that's ill. That personal self-care is crucial. And so taking care of her own depression will help her be a better support to the other family member. She can't be the other family member's therapist. I think that's the hard bit, because we want to help, but you can't be our therapist.
Talk a little bit about how you came to learn about how you needed to take care of yourself.
Well, I think I always knew that, but there were times when I was in the midst of when the illness was really bad, that I recognized that I was anxious, I was depressed. I knew that I needed to take care of myself. I sought a counselor for a while, really helped me. And since then, I really take a focus on taking care of myself. And I say, if I can't take care of myself, I'm not good for anybody else. And I also recognize that if I don't do that, I don't have relationships with my other children. Everything is just focused on this illness, and don't want that.
That kind of takes me back to that notion that what Carolyn, you mentioned earlier, was that when you have a relationship with your family, it shouldn't be just about the illness.
Right.
It's kind of like getting back to, here's a mother and a son, here's a sister and a brother, and for the patient's point of view, that they're not just their mental illness.
Right. Right.
I mean, and I guess I want to be clear, get something in this evening. We're moving into holiday time. Yeah. And holidays are tough when everything's fine, because they're loaded with expectations. So if you have a family member who has recently been diagnosed, or you know something's wrong but you don't know quite what yet because the diagnosing is not complete, setting yourself up for expectations that can't be met can make it really, really difficult. So being able to be more flexible than usual. Some people really struggle with large numbers of people. It makes it very difficult. Can we find a way to accommodate to that, so that it's whether the people there are people everybody knows about the illness or not, and how well informed are they? Is there alcohol around?
Right.
What kind of difference is that going to make? Those things to just think about, but also
And have open conversations.
Yes.
And have open conversations so that you can have, that you can try to have a holiday that is doable for all members then of the family.
Yeah.
Here's a question from a mother had a paranoid chronic schizophrenic sister who she stopped talking with, and she's worried about her. How can she reach out and help her now?
I guess a part of me would want to know is how long has the gap been? Sometimes they can be years. So it would be about reaching out just as one sister to another in the first instance. Because if she hasn't seen her sister with the illness for a long time, she doesn't actually know where she's at. She might be quite stable for all she knows, but she has memories of what it was like before, which may have caused part of the rift. So reaching out in a quiet way and an open way to see where things are at for her sister in the house. Would you agree? Or?
I would definitely agree.
And because you're not just a mother of a son with bipolar illness, you're also the president of the Duluth area of NAMI.
Right.
And talk a little bit about how NAMI can sort of help with parents in a situation like that, or people. She was talking about her sister. So in a situation like that.
So NAMI provides a lot of resources, and one of the things that we have is monthly family support groups, which is so beneficial to family members. It's facilitated. They're trained facilitators. It's the last Tuesday of every month from 6 to 7 in the Miller-Dwan meeting rooms. And there are a number of people that it has really grown. We don't meet in December at all, but those are the types of things that help. We have a website with many, many resources available, a call line, and we're not therapists by any means. We are there to provide resources for people. And one of our goals is also to reduce stigma. So.
Well, and I think one of the great things, though, that you provide is not just resources, but the resources of people who have the person who's often been down that road
Yes.
already. And
Right.
so one of the things that this person might find by coming to one of the NAMI support groups is someone who's already done that. They've reached out to their family member, and they'll hear stories of, you have to reach out 5, 6, or 7 times to get to time number 8, and time number 8 was the magic time.
Right.
And I think that those stories can really help light the path for people who are feeling some sense of trepidation.
They can. And then we also will hold education meetings on different topics. And so if there's an education meeting, so if someone wants more information on schizophrenia, and we had an education topic on that. So, and they're all a variety of things, but people have learned a lot. And again, same thing happens there at the education meetings. People will have, and they'll talk about information that they have in relation to their family members.
And what works for them.
Right, and what works for somebody doesn't always
Work for somebody
another.
else. But I think there is something that can't be measured, which is when you sit in a room with other people who have some similar experiences.
Yes.
I think that's incredibly important, because being a parent or a family member of somebody with a mental illness can be incredibly isolating.
It is.
We are near the end of our show. Jan, I'm going to let you have the closing words here. What would your message of hope be to the viewing audience tonight?
I think my message would be for people to get educated on whatever mental illness it is. Find out as much information as you can. Be an advocate. Talk about it. Don't isolate yourself. Take care of yourself. remember that you have other family members.
Well summarized.
Well summarized indeed. Thanks so much for being here and joining us tonight. I really do think the take-home message, one of the things that Joanne said that was so important is start having those conversations about how you want the holidays to be so you can make them gentle for all family members. And thanks so much for all of you for joining the discussion this week. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. Now, due to Thanksgiving week and WDSE's December membership drive, our next show will be 3 weeks from tonight on Thursday, December 10th. That's 3 Thursdays from now. So what's our message for you? Number one, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know that I am so grateful for all of you for tuning in and for all of your wonderful messages of support that you've given to me in knowing about my own loss. And I just want to shout out and say thank you so much for that. Next time, when we come back, we are going to be talking about mental illness and the criminal justice system on our, are you ready for this, 100th show. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching and good night.